The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, a space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today. Today, we are again joined by our special guest, Dr. Stephen J. Ducat. Dr. Ducat is an author, political psychologist, psychoanalyst, and former psychology professor in the School of Humanities at New College in California. Dr. Ducat holds a doctorate from the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. He completed his psychoanalytic training at the Psychoanalytical Institute of Northern California and holds licenses as a psychologist in both California and Oregon. He has a book, Hatreds We Love, The Psychology of Political Tribalism in Post-Truth America, that could be found on Amazon.com, and a Substack, Minding Politics, and that could be found at mindingpolitics.substack.com, and the Nova Society highly recommends checking out Dr. Ducat's work and supporting it. Brooke, what do we got today?
So we have a question. From Roger, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And Roger asks, I enjoyed the discussion about Trump's mental status and that of his followers, but I don't think the issues with the electorate were fully discussed. It's obvious to me that Trump is an authoritarian. Since the United States was founded as an alternative to authoritarianism, why do those who follow Trump and claim to love democracy support someone who is obviously against everything democracy stands for? Excellent question. Thank you.
Go ahead, Stephen. I'll let you take the high road on this one.
Well, I don't know if it's the high road, but it's one of the roads. And you know, when you're trudging through the slime, you can't really find a high road. But I think that the question about the electorate, of course, is absolutely essential because you can't have an authoritarian leader without authoritarian followers. And that was the focus of my book, Hatreds We Love. And you know, one thing we have to remember that the U.S. was founded on a very selective notion of democracy. The right to vote was accorded to white men of property. And that is the America MAGA wants to make great again. And the unspoken subtext of many of our founding documents was democracy for me, but not for thee. That said, Americans then, as now, were not a monolith. Many endorsed white supremacy, male domination, and genocidal colonial policy. They were the ones who wrote the laws and guided policy. However, some ordinary citizens and a few of the founding fathers were abolitionists, like John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Paine. Only Thomas Paine favored equal rights for women. Now, there were a number of the founding fathers that argued for the respectful and compassionate treatment of Native people, but they nevertheless believed that American Indians required, quote, civilizing, end quote, to enable their assimilation into white culture. Today, America is also equally divided politically and psychologically between authoritarian and democratic orientations. Conservatives tend to be more comfortable with autocratic rule, both in the governance of society and in the home. They value purity, sanctity, loyalty, sameness, and top-down rule. Liberals are more likely to be driven by a desire for equality, fairness, and collaboration. Now, I'm not just saying these things off the top of my head because of my own biases, which I admit I have, but this has actually been fairly well established by a variety of empirical researchers looking at the psychological correlates of partisans. And, you know, liberals tend to find novelty exciting and inviting. And unsurprisingly, these differences lead conservatives and liberals to even be drawn to different geographical locations, what I call in my book partisan self-segregation, where people move to areas that match their worldview. So conservatives tend to like the homogeneity and interpersonal distance of rural and suburban places, and to some extent suburbs. Liberals love multicultural urban environments filled with immigrants, cultural diversity, and foreign cuisines. So connecting this, back to your question, it's not really quite as simple as, the U.S. being founded in opposition to authoritarianism. We have been conflicted between these two polarities from the very beginning.
I wanted to add that Mrs. Adams, John Adams' wife, also pressured her husband to include women at the time. She told him that he and his the other framers were leaving out 50% of the population by excluding women, and obviously he didn't listen.
Yep, indeed. It took a long time for men to listen and to act on that.
And she actually, in some of her letters, threatened that could be an uprising by a very significant part of the population. And I think people get this wrong idea that the founding fathers were all about democracy, when in reality, they weren't. They didn't like democracy very much. James Madison, one of our presidents, basically quoted saying, democracies have been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and in general, been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. John Quincy Adams, another president of ours, the most unstable, fluctuating, and short-lived form of government. So, the thing that gets me with the electorate, to the question is that the electorate thinks they're part of the club. They think that they're going to be part of the club. And as you pointed out, it was really written to be a republic as opposed to democracy because they thought they could control. These were men of wealth and power and property that were part of the Continental Congress. These were the guys making up the rules. They didn't want the mob. They didn't want majority rule because that might jeopardize what they had. They were a club of their own. I mean, I know many times we make them out to be these absolutely, and they were brilliant men, but they were brilliant men of their time that were looking out for their own interests. And in many cases, they did everything they could to keep, there was separation there. And they tried to keep that separation.
And one of the ways that they tried to control what they viewed as the mob, which is anybody without property and wealth, was to encourage working class males to identify with race rather than class. Yes, we may have our boot on your neck, male working class, but you can have your boot on the neck of non-white people. So, that's been one of the strategic uses of racism from the very beginning.
Scott, what do you got?
Well, I have a question. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing.
Uh-oh.
I've spent a fair amount of time in Europe, and my understanding is that farmers in Europe live in town and drive out to their fields in the morning and come back into town at night. Whereas in America, farmers live on their farms and sometimes go into town. It seems to me something you just said kind of struck a chord. Like, do they like this sort of rural lifestyle that they have, which is very isolating and doesn't lend itself toward thinking about the community? Or is that imposed on them just by the way that we've developed our rural life here?
Well, my answer would be yes. In other words, I think that, as with many things, causality operates in both directions at once. That to live in a rural area is to have more distance from your neighbor. And if you are the sort of person that craves more distance, you're going to be drawn to a rural area and thereby beginning to shape its character. One study that was done on the, I guess you could call it the psychogeography of partisan identity, the ways in which people of different political orientations are drawn to different areas of the country. And they found that the more there was a, again, we can't infer necessary causality to this, but there's a near one-to-one correlation between the geographical distance from one's neighbor and the likelihood of having a conservative worldview. And I can't speak to Europe, but this certainly seems to be operative in the U.S.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other part of it is that, and maybe you could explain this. I'm shifting the conversation here a little bit. We've seen in the last few days very sort of anti-consumer, anti. I mean, I would just say that it's a desire to be on the wrong side of everything from the Trump administration, whether it's allowing more poisons in the air or in our food, or doing away with consumer protections for this or that, whether it's banking or any kind of like fraud, letting all these convicted fraud cases, or even like those who pleaded guilty to committing fraud, pardoning them. Like, there's this movement toward being on the wrong side of rightness that seems perverse to me and destructive. And I don't understand how people are getting behind that.
Well, what's going on and why people are getting behind it are different but related issues. One of the things that links all of the you could call it corruption, you could call it criminal behavior, you could call it sociopathy. In a way, being a sociopath, which is, exploiting others without conscience, has moved from a kind of psychopathology to a philosophy of governing. It is the mafioso model of governing. We have the right, we arrogate to ourselves the right to do anything, to harm anyone, to exploit anyone in order to derive monetary or some other gain. It's the freedom to harm. And I mean, that's how I talk about it in my book. And in many ways, I think it relates to one of the most, I may have talked about this in the last time we had a conversation, but I think it relates to one of the most common findings in the psychological research on partisans, which is that those on the right have what's called a social dominance orientation. That means that they view as natural and desirable a hierarchical organization of the world in which certain people, certain classes deserve more than others and should be controlling others. It's another way of talking about authoritarianism. And so part of the social dominance orientation means that you have the right to do whatever you can get away with. It's a kind of Hobbesian, world of, war of each against all. And I think that this is in many ways the explicit worldview of MAGA, especially MAGA leaders. And so we may talk a bit later about the threat that Trump is making against these Democratic legislators who are telling veterans that they have to, that they don't have to obey a legal order, because I think it very much connects to that. I don't know if you're ready to kind of talk about that, but we can get into that some more if you'd like.
Yeah, we've got another question coming down the road here, and we're going to have you on.
Yeah.
And that'll be able to go in very nicely. So, and again, you mentioned causality, and I thought that was very interesting. You mentioned causality, and I also know that one of the main drivers of Trump's popularity is if you continue to say something over and over again, eventually people either give up and say, yeah, okay, it's the truth, or just simply give up and say, I just don't care anymore. And, here in the United States, and we hear it all the time, and we've heard a lot since World War II, the concept of democracy. And we've shoved that out there so much, democracy. This is what democracy is. Do you think that we've actually created maybe a concept of democracy that doesn't exist? And that is what these people that are supporting Trump have bought into? I mean, if again, it gets beaten into us in school as we grow up. We've actually, even in history that we teach in primary school and we teach in high school, where we basically made everything that we did was great, big, and always right. So I'm wondering if this is a monster of our, did we create this monster ourselves simply by doing all this?
Well, of course, words like democracy are constantly being battled over. I mean, political communication is rife with wars over meaning. And one of the things that we have seen since the attempted coup by Trump in 2020, is a repudiation of the very word democracy. I mean, if you, to the extent you can tolerate paying attention to right-wing media, you may have noticed that democracy has receded as an explicit value. And, there are various people in MAGA who have taken one essay out of the Federalist Papers and made it the entire perspective of the Founding Fathers, which is that essay in which, they said, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. That's the jargon. But actually, this was debated from the very beginning. This was argued over furiously from the very beginning. And Republicans have now taken, since this coup attempt, had taken the tack that, no, we're not a democracy. No, democracy is not a good thing, and that's not what we want. So the linguistic battles continue. And, I'm kind of thinking about, maybe we'll get to it, this question that Rosalind asked from Tampa, Florida, about misinformation and disinformation. And, we'll probably get to that. But I think it very much connects to that.
Go ahead,
I mean, it gets to the point where these people are saying that Democrats are wrong because the word Democrat, is we're not a democracy, and Republicans are right because this is a Republican. And there's a difference between the two of them, and they're right and we're wrong, and you can't, which is stuff that you hear on like their right-wing radio stations and things like that.
Yeah.
When you listen to them, it's like this argument can't be refuted. It is absolutely positively this thing, and it's a ridiculous idea. Certainly, academically, bizarre, and yet that seems to be what at least a large part of the electorate, and if not all the populace, seems to go with. That there's a right and a wrong.
Yeah,
go on.
Well, and you'll notice that there's been a change in the linguistic strategy of Republicans, that for about, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years now, they all decided, and they're good at being homogenous in their approach, they all decided that, no, we will not use the word democratic to describe the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Because democratic was then, until recently, was a positive adjective. To be democratic was a good thing. So now after that they were called and still are called the Democrat Party. They won't use the adjective form of the word anymore. That is taboo. And it was taboo because democratic was something good. They haven't changed that, but they're no longer taking the position that to be democratic is something good.
Yeah, that sounds like a Frank Luntz type of thing.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
How to play with words.
Out of his Machiavellian frontal lobe, no question about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of this question that kind of hit me was, since the United States was founded as an alternative to authoritarianism, I would make the argument that it was against the King of England, absolutely. But at the same time, there was Parliament that did not give the rights to the American people, which is really who they had the real argument with. And what the United States was founded on was not authoritarianism to one person, but authoritarianism to a system. Even though it was checks and balances, you still had a president who John Adams wanted to call Your Majesty in the original arguments that they had. That was one of his we should call him Your Majesty. He couldn't stand the idea that Washington just wanted Mr. President, because that was just too, in his mind, lowly. So is the concept of the United States in the minds of the citizenry, is it wrong? Have we got it all wrong all this whole time? And has that now perpetuated itself into the position that we are in now, where we're actually returning to maybe what the original idea was, which was you're just going to have a bunch of elite people just going to be running the country, and all the rest of you just go to work.
Well, that has been a major strain in U.S. history. I mean, I see American history as an ongoing battle between different orientations. And there are times when the country moves in a more pro-democratic, small d democratic direction, and other times when its authoritarian genes get expressed. And I don't think it's just one thing. And that's, the whole notion that the fantasy of originalists is that the U.S. was once just one thing, and it should stay that one thing. When the reality is, it's been an ongoing conflict between different notions of governing, both among leaders and among the population. And part of that has been the very different psychological orientations of the individuals who make up the electorate, people who are drawn to authoritarian power and people who bristle at it. And I think, folks on this podcast are in the latter category, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think we're evidence of that.
We're almost anarchists when it comes to that, but it does seem to me like so this is a bad reading of unitary executive of theory, right? Because the unitary executive theory is only supposed to be about the executive branch of the government. And it seems that with Congress giving up any kind of oversight, right? And, we just saw like Doge was a perfect example of authoritarianism. The Congress is supposed to, one of their three major jobs is supposed to be oversight of the executive branch. But the Congress people said, we don't have the ability to do that. So we need the executive branch to bring in their own agency to do that. And obviously it was a disaster and didn't do what it purported to do, and may have been a really cynical ploy to just get a lot of data in the hands of the few. But in any event, that theory has now become something completely different, where the president of the United States is the ultimate authority and gets to say what is what, which includes the color of the sky and what the temperature is outside, and is our prices up or down, is the economy good or bad. These people are drug dealers and we must kill them. There's a whole slew of executive pronouncements that are like more of an insane king than a good king in any way, shape, or form. And they're running with it.
We have only one branch of government right now. People talk about the risk of fascism. Hey, folks, we're there. We have all branches of government, at least in their majorities, surrendering to the executive branch. And that happened in an astonishingly short period of time.
Yeah.
So what caused that to happen? And my other question is, and I've been pondering this, does the executive individual believe that prices are falling and that inflation is at 0%? Does he actually believe all of that? Or does he know he's lying to himself and everyone else?
Well, I think, as I have said in other contexts, Trump believes in nothing and will say anything. And his base knows nothing and will believe anything. I think in many ways, Trump is a textbook example of a sociopath. He will do and say anything, use anyone in any way he wishes to pursue his self-interest as he defines it. And if that means lying about statistics, or as he's done recently, insisting that the Labor Department withhold statistics, I think it's the Labor Department, there's certain economic data that he has decided, no, we're not going to release them. Nothing he says can be believed. If his lips are moving, he's lying. And nobody is stopping him. Truth is what he asserts. And if he asserts something different than he asserted yesterday, well, that is now the truth. That's my take on your question. He'll say what he needs to say if it serves him.
We hope he doesn't believe it, Brooke, because if he does, then he's scarier than we first thought he was. Yeah, that really brings you, you think that we're being attacked by another country and unleash the nuclear force of the United. So we're hoping he's just being the used car salesman in this thing and telling you what you want to hear. It's not a lemon. What do you mean it doesn't start? Sure it does. Yeah. Can you hear the engine?
Yeah. Those fishermen, they're cartel. That's the cartel navy down there.
Yeah.
And, we're protecting you. Oh no, we don't need to provide you any evidence of anything. Take our word for it.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershworth, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium dedicated to providing solutions to social and political issues for NGOs and international government agencies. Through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research, the Phoenix Research Group advances understanding and practical strategies for complex challenges. The Phoenix Research Group is a division of the Phoenix Research Institute, the producer of the Nova Society podcast.